What's up, guys? Dylan Russ here, joined today by the senior reporter for MMA Junkie at USA Today, conducting interviews, writing articles, providing UFC event coverage all over the globe for almost a decade now. Mr. Mike Bohn, how you doing, Mike?
Hey man, I'm good. Glad we got the chance to do this.
Thank you, man. Thank you for taking the time. I want to hear a little bit about you, your backstory first. So I just wanted to ask you where you were born and raised.
Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. But I've lived in Toronto for a little over 10 years now. So I'm actually back in Vancouver as we speak here, visiting family for the holidays and stuff. So
Awesome.
always nice to come home despite the insane dump of snow we've got over the past few days.
Yeah, I'm in New York right now. It's not snowing right now, but at the Jets game last night, it was 3 hours of cold weather, rain, harsh conditions, but it's football weather. So, what hockey game were you at last night?
It was the Canucks versus Seattle, which is I'm not like a massive hockey fan, which maybe surprised some people being the Canadian, but that was like the best hockey game I've ever been to. Vancouver
Really?
was down 5-3 in the third period, came back, got to overtime, got to shootout and won. So
Oh,
definitely got the money's worth there. Got a little extra hockey action, and yeah, 10 goals. Can't really ask for much more than that.
awesome. So, growing up, you say you're not much of a hockey fan. Were you more of an MMA fan growing up? Maybe some other sports?
Basketball was definitely like the first sport that I really got into and played in high school and elementary school and all that stuff. MMA kind of came on the radar maybe like around seventh grade or so. Seeing like Pride and things like that, and that's like what really turned my affection towards it. And then obviously like all throughout high school got like really into it, would have friends over and we'd split the cost for like every UFC pay-per-view. It was such like a monthly event for us that we'd all look so forward to. And then yeah, the passion grew stronger from there. And when I finally went to my first live event for a UFC card when I was 16, that changed everything. That's why I was like completely hooked and obsessed.
The first event I ever been to, I was working alongside you at the one event I got to go to, UFC 274 with Gaethje Oliver. That was great. Great to see it in person. Uh, when did you were a writer growing up, right? Were you more interested in the writing side of the journalism game?
A little bit. I mean, honestly, I didn't know that I wanted to do journalism stuff till like my third year in university or like between second and third year. But like looking back in hindsight, maybe I could have recognized it earlier, but like I wasn't, a science and math kind of guy. Like those weren't my strengths. It was always English, creative writing, things like that I much preferred doing. So I didn't really maybe understand that, but like that kind of stuff during the time of high school definitely came easier to me.
I went to a high school called High School for Math, Science, and Engineering, and now I'm a sports journalism major in college. So I understand that. When you started with the journalism in that third year, was it automatically like, I want to cover MMA, I want to write about MMA, or was there a little bit of a process there?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a process. I mean, that was always kind of when I decided to make that transition, like the overarching thing, because just like I think it was after my first year of university, me and a bunch of buddies that we were really like was close with, we were like, oh, maybe we should make like a blog where we just like write down our predictions for these upcoming fights. And I was the person that like set up a little blog spot and like edited their little paragraphs they'd send me for the predictions, added the photos and stuff. And I was like, oh, I really like this, and then had another friend who designed websites for a living, and he was like, oh, like I can make you something a little more official, I'll make you a little logo and things like that. And he was doing that for me, and I was like really enjoying it. I'd reach out to a few people and get some interviews and all that. And all the while my first and second years at the university, I was bouncing around. I tried like sociology one year, I tried just like general studies one year, and none of it really clicked with me. And kind of in between that second and third year, I changed courses again. And the university I was at, University of Victoria, which is out here in British Columbia, they only offered a creative writing major. They didn't offer a journalism major. It was just a minor. And the creative writing stuff, like it was, educational in some ways, but you were doing poetry writing and fiction writing and stuff like that. I'm just like, this is not very interesting to me. The marks weren't on par with what it was for all my minor courses for journalism. So I was like, hey, like I want to try to find a school that I can thrive on the journalism side. And that's ultimately what brought me out to Toronto, because they have one of the best journalism schools in Canada. Ryerson, formerly known, it's now Toronto Metropolitan University. And yeah, they have like a very strong journalism program. Some of the best broadcasters and writers and stuff like that on kind of the sports end from throughout Canada have gone there. So that's what ultimately hooked me out to Toronto. And that's kind of where it grew. And as I'm sure we'll get into, that's kind of what led to some opportunities that I currently have now.
So there, I was just about to ask. So when you went to Toronto, is that when you maybe started ramping it up more, the MMA coverage?
Yeah, so I actually was out there where you are for a summer doing an internship in New York at a radio station that did broadcasting of college football and stuff like that, and some college basketball stuff. So while I was out there, I actually met at a Beat the Streets wrestling event that was in New York, met Luke Thomas there. And
Really?
most people, of course, who are listening to this probably already know who Luke Thomas is.
Yeah.
And at the time, he was still working for MMA Fighting as one of their managing editors. And as some people may or may not know, MMA Fighting, a parent company, Vox, they also own Bloody Elbow and MMA Mania. They're all under the same umbrella there. And we had talked a little bit, and I told him about some of my goals and what I wanted to do. And at the time, I was still running that website that my friend had designed for me, and I'd got some notable interviews, and had a few like pieces that I had done that had got pretty good views by my standards at the time. And Luke was like, hey, like I can ask around, maybe see if there's an opportunity, because I wasn't making much money at all off that website. It was just Google AdSense, which is my best month ever was maybe like $100 or $200 or something like that. And he had put me in touch with the editor at MMA Mania, and they had an opening for me. So when I moved to Toronto that September to start school, had a job with MMA Mania come through as a writer, and I was basically working like the weekend shifts, Friday night, Saturday day and night, Sunday day and night, and then doing school stuff during the week. So it was obviously a pretty busy schedule there, and I did that for close to a year. I was getting ready to go back for school for the following year, and the August of that year, 2013, had Dan Stupp, the former editor in chief at MMA Junkie, reach out saying they had an opening. And I jumped all over that. And yeah, the rest is kind of history in that regard. I actually didn't end up going and finishing my last year of school. I just jumped in to doing what I wanted to do. And that was, the job I was trying to go to school to try to get, pretty much. So I was like, hey, why spend another year doing this, if I need to go back and finish sometime down the line. But I felt pretty confident in all the stuff I had learned to that point, and I was ready to put it into play.
I'm sure you have no regrets about that decision. It seems to have paid off. Now I see nowadays you're doing some NBA stuff as well. When did you start? I saw you talk to Kyrie, you talked to Jason Tatum. When did you start getting into that realm?
I've actually been doing it for like 6 or 7 years now, but it's just been very infrequent. Like right when the Raptors kind of started to have their upward push, during the DeRozan and Kyle Lowry years, where we were just getting, knocked out of the playoffs every year by LeBron and Cleveland and stuff like that. LeBronto, as they called him by that point,
I
because
was
he
gonna
just
say.
owned us so hard. Yeah, so like I was doing some stuff here and there. I covered the All-Star game when they came to Toronto a few years ago, and I've just kind of got to do it as like something complementary to the MMA coverage. Obviously, that is kind of the first and foremost. So, if there's a game on a Saturday night, you won't see me there by any stretch, right? Because we always got fights to deal with. But yeah, when I can go, it's a great experience. Try to do some writing for USA Today or get them some social media assets, things like that. So it's just a nice kind of side gig to break up the monotony of MMA a little bit. Obviously, the sport is crazy, and different
Oh,
stuff
off
happens,
season.
yeah, all the time. And that's what makes it so fun. It's very different than covering game 43 of an 82 game season that ultimately, like, obviously has some meaning in the grander scheme, but not really. So it's just nice to kind of dip your toe and see how a different world operates that's maybe a little more buttoned up and being around a little bit longer. So I think it's a great experience, and I really enjoy talking to the athletes over there as well too, though.
Do you love the fact that MMA has no off season, or just part of you wish that you had like a little couple week breather at some point, maybe in the summer, to just tone down a little bit?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, like I'm so deep into it at this point that it's just kind of life. But I guess this is our off season as we speak, this little 4 week break that the UFC has, and there's some stuff here and there. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of just like become a part of life at this point. They're like, hey, if there's something on a Saturday night or Sunday morning, probably not going to be able to do it. And then, a lot of Fridays there's Bellator or PFL or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I mean, like, sure, I do wish to a degree, but at the same time, the UFC schedule and the MMA schedule does make it easier on us to a degree. Like during this break, there's needs for content. The site still has to keep running, so you kind of have to dig a little deeper into your creative bag to figure out what you're gonna do to get content out there, as opposed to just being like, hey, there's media day every Wednesday. You can
So,
rely on there being like 16 interviews to write up or all these different things, weigh-ins, press conferences, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, like it's kind of a mixed bag, but yeah, I do think, there is oversaturation in the sport to a degree. Like, I think it would be better off for the UFC product to cut down to, in the 30s in terms of events per year. But they are currently in the midst of a TV deal with ESPN, and they're pretty much guaranteeing them 42 shows a year. So it's a dream world to live in at this point.
and pay-per-views are getting more expensive too.
For
Uh,
sure.
you said that these it consumes your life to a degree covering this sport. It really does. But I don't know when you guys sleep, you and Nolan, these guys at Junkie, all the stuff you guys do. Are there things you do or tell yourself to try to maintain a balance so that it doesn't overconsume you, so that you could still do things on the side and have fun, and it's not always like, you're not always thinking about it and consumed by it?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it kind of has its ebbs and flows, right? Sometimes you do need a little time to burn off, and yeah, sometimes you kind of just go with it. But I think I've kind of had a pretty good balance now. I mean, I'm more like the personal side. I have a girlfriend in my life that, was not dating anyone for several years there. So that like kind of forced to pull me away, the days off I'm spending with her, and as opposed to still sitting around and working and things like
Yeah.
that. So there's little things that do break it up. But for the most part, it's yeah, like kind of always go, go, go. And there's always something to do, especially dealing with like the social media side of it, right? Like always need to be getting new content up and things like that. So it is an endless grind, but obviously I appreciate everyone on the MMA Junkie staff who is willing to, help out or does their own thing that, keeps us afloat when other people are away. So we've figured out a fairly good rotation for what it is right now. And obviously those are things that you always try to continue adjusting and balancing depending on what's going on.
In addition to all the stuff you just named, you also break news quite often. So you always have to be like ready for the update, not glued to your phone always, but to a
Mm-hmm.
certain degree. You just mentioned your team. What can you tell me about working alongside guys like Nolan, Matt Erickson, and the culture and the team? How is it to work with a team? Because unfortunately, I do not work with a team. I feel like it would be cool to do this with other people.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's obviously great to be in a situation where you're with like-minded individuals, right? And I think everyone has their own strengths, and I think as a team as a whole, I mean, we've been together for quite a long time now. I mean, obviously, there's been some changes. We had John Morgan leave earlier this year, and that was obviously a big change for us, considering he had been with the site essentially since its inception. I'd worked side by side with him for so long, but I think we've done a great job of kind of moving forward from that, and think everyone knows their role to a lot of degrees. And, like any situation, there's, certain things where you kind of maybe have conflicts at times, but you work through them and all that stuff. But generally speaking, yeah, I think we have, one of the best teams out there, and we do an amazing job covering the sport from top to bottom.
No doubt about it. I want to ask you about some current events in the UFC. Today was announced Cheeto Vera, Marlon Vera versus Corey Sandhagen, February 18th, main event. A lot of people are saying some stuff has fallen through for UFC 284. Why not put that event in front of a packed stadium, in front of a crowd? It might be. What do you think that is? Are you happy about this fight overall being made?
I mean, I guess there's a few things like that fight needs to be 5 rounds, right? So are you going to throw a third 5 round fight on UFC 284 when there's already two championship fights, or, one
Yeah.
undisputed, one interim fight? So that's a thing. And the reality is that, like, as we talked about a few minutes ago, UFC has to put on 42 events a year, and they need these main events, right? Like there's only so many pairings you can do of guys that are in the top 5 or top 10 that are a justifiable main event, and you see that they can't even do that sometimes. That's how you end up with, some of these weird headliners at times that are like, okay, well, this doesn't feel like a main event, but they just got to roll with it. So in a perfect world, yeah, I would have loved that fight on that card. I think I'm going to Perth, so I would have liked to be able to see that person in person. And those are two of the most exciting guys out there. So like that fight deserves better than a UFC Apex environment. But I understand why they're doing it. It's just a need to fill the content schedule, and you try to plop these main events in where you can.
You think you're going to Perth? Are you going to Brazil as well?
I'm not sure on that one yet. We're actually figuring out 2023 budget stuff as we speak here. So I'd love to. I wouldn't be mad if I don't go. I know there's some other people on the staff that are keen to go to Brazil who have never been. I've been there like 5 or 6 times at this point, back when they were doing shows there more often. So I've done that trip. It would be cool to go as always. I always like being there for the big shows and stuff, but TBD on that one.
We talked about how there's no off season. Back to that, isn't it cool? I feel like one of the best things in life is having things to look forward to. Isn't that one of the better parts of the job? Always having an event. You have a trip to Perth lined up in 2 months and other places around the globe. Is that one of the cooler parts of the job?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's why a lot of people that you do see involved in the sport are involved in it. I mean, whether it's like people on the UFC side, PR who want to, have that job because they want to travel the world, the fighters themselves. I think that's something that's kind of unfortunately been taken away from a lot of them due to COVID and things like that. And like the shift we've seen in the UFC schedule to so many events at the Apex, whereas pre-COVID, every single fight card was in a different city, in a different state or country around the world. But yeah, I mean, the ability to kind of go and watch these fights in different places. I mean, it's amazing. Like I got the chance to go to Singapore and Abu Dhabi in 2022 here. Those were both amazing cards and obviously cool places to visit. Long flights, but yeah, it's worth it in the end. I mean, it's I think one of the great perks of this job for sure.
You had some really cool coverage in Singapore. That was awesome. Uh, the sport has evolved so much since you got into this in 2013, 9 years ago, and we've seen so much evolution with the techniques itself, calf kicks, the training, the medical stuff. We haven't seen much evolution in the judging and the scoring system. Little tweaks here and there. They say damage more now than control and whatnot. Do you
Yeah.
think that we will see some more tweaks or maybe some changes to judging in the near future?
Man, I'd love to say yes, but I just have such little hope at this point. And the problem is like, every state pretty much has its own commission, right? So it's like not just being like, okay, well, let's come up with these changes and implement them. It's like, okay, how are you going to get every state to implement them? They all have their processes and how they get voted in and little things like that. And like we've kind of got on the same page now, but like remember for like a year and a half there, they'd be like the new unified rules, but then we'd go to one state and be like, well, they're on the old new unified rules, or they're still not doing this. It's like we can't even get the same rules on the same page for state to state. So for them to be wholesale, like implementing wholesale changes to judging just feels like such a steep climb. And like what's it going to be ultimately, what kind of things are you going to do there? So I think where we're at now, and like the obviously hot topic with should these commissions be using Douglas Crosby or people like this anymore? Those are the changes that I think are ultimately going to be most effective short term, is getting the people who either aren't following the scoring criteria properly or have outdated mentalities on what these scoring things should look like. That's I think like the best way to implement change right now without being like, okay, we're gonna go to a open scoring or a half point scoring system or like all these other ideas that people float out there for what they could want to do when it comes to scoring.
So you mentioned Douglas Crosby. I just watched you provide some thoughts on the whole Douglas Crosby situation on the spinning back click. For some of the people that might be watching that don't know, what is the spinning back click and what do you guys do on that show?
Yeah, it's a weekly roundtable show. Like, you could look at it like a PTI type of thing that, they have on ESPN or any one of those kind of shows. We usually have, four of our staff members hosted by Gorgeous George of MMA Junkie Radio, who's an OG of the game. Him and Goes have done like over 3,000 episodes of radio since their inception, which is just an absolutely incredible feat. And then the other two panelists will be, myself, Danny Segura, Nolan King, Farah Hanoun, whoever it may be. And they'll just kind of discuss the weekly topics and the biggest news in the sport and kind of looking back on it, spinning forward on it. And yeah, it's a great time. I mean, definitely one of our projects that we're looking to make bigger in 2023 for the site as a whole. We just took it live about 6 weeks ago. Before we were doing like a pre-taped version and stuff like that. But I think us going live has brought a lot of excitement and new energy to the show, and obviously makes it easier on some of our behind the scenes workers being able to produce something live instead of
Yeah.
having to go back and edit an hour long program.
Well, I'm excited to watch it grow. I want to mention one more fighter or potential fight. Francis Ngannou, John Jones, one of the most highly anticipated matchups of hopefully next year. Eric Nixick says that's the one they want. Brandon Gibson says that's the one they want. Do we see that matchup in 2023?
Man, like I wish I could sit here and say like confidently yes, but I'm just saying like hopefully yes. That's the fight I want to see. As we get to the end of the year here, I do all these podcasts and all these shows, and it's all like, what's the one fight you want to see next year? And that's the one to me. I mean, but I just can't sit here. Like I was doing one show with like TSN's Aaron Bronstetter, and it's like a yearly prediction show. We had myself, Brian Campbell, Sean El Shadi, Mark Ramondi on there, kind of giving our thoughts and predictions. And like last year, we were kind of looking ahead, being like, this is the year John Jones wins the heavyweight title. And like the dude didn't even fight this year. So I don't know. I mean, I'd love to say that he comes back, fights Francis Ngannou for the heavyweight title, but like Francis obviously has his own situation going on with the UFC. We don't even know if he's going to be there for his next fight. So I hope they can get it all done. I think that's a very important fight for the UFC to put on, an important one for the sport. But like, I'm just so beyond the point of being like, I'm confident John Jones is going to do anything because we just haven't seen him in so long.
Understandable. Let's play matchmaker Mike real quick. Completely
But
hypothetical. Say they do make that matchup, Francis and John Jones. What do you do with Cyril Gahn? Do you do Blades? Do you do Sergey Pavlovich?
ooh, I think you probably go with Blades. That feels like the most high stakes fight to me right now, and the guys who have kind of earned it, assuming that's like a title eliminator for whoever would fight the Jones and Ngannou winner if this all goes perfectly. So that makes sense. Pavlovich is an absolute beast. I think he's got great things in his future, but I think you could do like one more fight with him against whomever else in that kind of top five area, and then have him fight into that mix after one more. But yeah, I think that's the one you do with Gone and Curtis Blades. That seems like
Maybe
the best matchmaking to me.
maybe Pavlovich Stipe. I hear nothing from Stipe. I hear nothing about Stipe. You probably know better than anyone. What's going because the Jones Stipe fight seems to have fallen through at this point.
Yeah, he's I guess you would call it like semi-retired or anything. He's just like doing his own thing. He's a full-time firefighter now. Like he's doing it part-time. So he's fully immersed in that world. And like I wouldn't be surprised. I'm sure at some point, if he is done, he'll get caught at an event or an interview somewhere. I'll do someone with like Ariel or myself or whoever, and maybe he'll make it official, or maybe he just drops an Instagram post and then fades off into the night. But like he doesn't seem too concerned about giving anyone clarity about what's going on here. And I think he's just hanging out. And I know there were some discussions about doing him and John Jones in like September or November, but from what I'd heard, and this reporting's been put out there by like Ariel Helwani as well, like they weren't willing to give him much of a pay increase to do like a huge fight like John Jones. It was going to be like, hey, this is your purse, either take it or leave it. And he's like, well, I'll leave it, and then they moved on. So yeah, I think for him to get back in the cage, they're going to have to treat him as the greatest heavyweight of all time from a financial side, and it doesn't really seem like they're doing that at the moment.
Which is crazy because it feels like just 2 years ago, people were calling Stipe Miocic the greatest heavyweight of all time. I don't hear many people saying that nowadays.
Yeah, just because he's not in the conversation. I mean, you can bet your ass if he booked a fight tomorrow and the UFC started running promos for it, that's what they're calling him every 5 seconds, and putting those sound bites from Joe Rogan and Dana White and stuff in the commercials. It's just he's not right. He's not here right now to be talked about. So, but like in my book, he most certainly is. The moment he is retired, you should put that man in the UFC Hall of Fame whenever you get the opportunity. So like he's done it all. He doesn't need to fight anymore. Like would coming back and fighting John Jones or doing a trilogy with Francis Ngannou like be a nice feather in the cap if he could win those? Amazing. But his legacy is pretty much set in my opinion. I don't think he needs to do any more for us to change our standing. He leaves the door. If he comes back and beats those guys, one or two of them or both of them, that puts a stamp on it. But like right now, he's the front runner with that title of heavyweight goat, and it's on someone else to take it from him now.
Speaking of semi-retirements or retirements, as someone that's like so, of course, involved in the sport, you're at these events, you're doing these interviews, you're with these fighters a lot. Do you ever get sad? Is that part of the job? Getting sad when some of these guys we've seen so many retirements this year. Aldo, Rockhold, Edgar, all these people, Joanna. You ever get sad when these guys, when you're not going to see them and interview them as much going forward?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like especially when they go out, as many of them do. Like no one wanted to see that happen to Frankie Edgar, and that's one
Mhm.
that's going to stick thoroughly in my mind, especially because it was kind of the most recent of all the names you listed there. But yeah, I was like as cage side for all those, for when Joanna got knocked out by Wally, for that Rockhold fight, for a lot of them. And yeah, it's just crazy because like a lot of these people, like a Luke Rockhold, before I was watching him in Strike Force before I even knew I wanted to be a journalist or things like that. So to kind of see it come all this way, and then obviously, him to kind of go out like that, at least he didn't get brutally knocked out or anything, but that was certainly a possibility. Yeah, it's crazy, man. Like, but I've kind of known that from the early portion that like I'm gonna be around doing this a lot longer than these fighters will. Like,
Oh,
I'm going to be in this position from the beginning of someone's career to the end of it and well beyond, multiple times over. And I've seen that happen. So something you kind of accept. But yeah, like having to got to know some of these people, how like good of actual humans they are and things like that, is kind of sad to see them go out. But this is the dog eat dog kind of sport we're in, and no one really goes out on a high unless you're like Habib.
I got this. Yeah, I got this one last one, then a little speed round. Do we see UFC return to the home and native land of Canada in 2023? Any plans you think maybe for the fall?
Yeah, I heard that they had intended on doing 3 events here this year, and they'd probably all be kind of on the back half of the year, though, likely because it's hard to get an arena with hockey going on and basketball, especially in Toronto. So I think we do see at least one show. I'd be obviously over the moon if they do 3, but if you're asking me at least a return, I can say with strong confidence we do get one Canada card this year minimum.
I'm sure we'll see you at all three of those if there are three. All right, little speed round. Some random questions for you, real quick. Favorite musician?
Ooh. Um, Kid Cudi's one that still comes to mind, like that kind of goes back to the old school. That's one that kind of gives me my best memories. I'll still jam to, but I'm more of like a podcast guy these days. If I have any time to like listen stuff, it's more podcast than music. If it gets on like a super long flight and I've listened to all my podcasts, then I'm like, okay, we're going to the music side of it. But yeah, like I haven't sat down and listened to music for like an extensive period in a while, just because there's so much other stuff that I consume.
Kid Cudi, I had the pleasure of seeing him live in California last year. He was great. Favorite place to travel outside of work? So not for these all these events around the globe, but maybe a vacation spot.
Yeah, probably like Orange County, California, just because my parents are like semi-retired. My dad actually lives down there half the year with my stepmom. So like anytime I get to go and visit them, they're not too far from the beach. That California sunshine and stuff is one of my favorites. But there's still some places on the checklist that I want to get to that might usurp that if I eventually get there.
What about favorite place to travel for work of city that you or country that you look forward to going to when you get the gig?
Ooh. Man, it's tough. My favorite place I've ever been to, and it's only one, was Japan. Back in 2014, I got to go to one of the cards in Tokyo. Randomly, I think it was Josh Barnett and Roy Nelson in the main event, which crazy that was headlining cards, but still, that was was a massive like sushi ramen buff who loves that type of food. To go out there was unreal, and just all like the stimulants of walking around Tokyo with their crazy lights and things like that. That's like still to this day my favorite trip, and I only went there once for like 4 days.
We've spoken about many so far, but what's one fight? When I ask this question, what fight comes to mind? Fight you're excited for 2023?
Right now, like that's currently booked, it's got to be Makachev and Volkanovski, right? Like that's so good. Um, one
Oh,
and two pound for pound, like yeah, I love that fight. It's gonna be so good. I think they've done 7 champion versus champion fights in UFC history. This might be my favorite.
you'd probably be the best person to ask this because I have no idea. Has there ever been a number one versus number two pound for pound fight?
I think John Jones and Daniel Cormier going into their second fight was it. But I'd have to look back specifically. I don't know if Jones was like technically out of the rankings because of his time off, but I think for like the independent outlets, that was the one. So yeah, like it is extremely rare for this to happen, and very much looking forward to that.
Not most fun traveling wise or like for you, but what was the event of the year for the UFC in your opinion?
I think it's got to be UFC 274 or UFC 2 or no UFC 275 rather, Singapore, and UFC 281 New York. Like those were both phenomenal cards. Shout out to the first London card too in March. That was unreal
Atmosphere.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that
You're
was
there.
just yeah,
That fight
unforgettable.
atmosphere is crazy, right? To be there
Yeah,
live. Yeah.
yeah, man, it was a great environment. So those are tough ones, splitting hairs. I'll go with 275, but yeah, like they put on some amazing cards this year.
So the Zoom's gonna end in 10 minutes because I don't have Zoom Pro and I don't want to take up too much of your time anyway.
All good, man.
I would say as a fan, from a fan's perspective, 275 for me was the most fun to watch, and I thought that Yuri and Glover was fight of the year. Uh,
Ditto.
what fighter provides the funniest sound bites, or what is a sound bite that comes to mind, a funny sound bite that you've received?
Ooh, just from this past year?
Yeah, or from either way, all time or this year.
Man, I'd have to go back and think about them all. I know it's not MMA. This will probably make people actually annoyed, but when I talked to Jake Paul and he did that like fake, karate demonstration intro right before he was supposed to fight Anderson Silva, that shit was hilarious. And you could tell he was just trying to troll the entire MMA community. So that one kind of stands out. Or federal fucking prison from Dana White at the press
Yeah,
conference is another good
yeah.
one.
That was about James Krause, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That was one. You mentioned Jake Paul. What about Snoop Dogg? Was that maybe your most fun interview ever? Does anyone pass Mr. Dog?
That one was pretty funny for sure. Yeah, when you said does anyone pass, I was gonna say Snoop doesn't pass, especially the joints. But there's yeah, that one's up there for sure. Like that was a really cool experience doing that event, the Triller Fight Club event where it was Jake Paul versus Ben Askren. It was right in the thick of COVID. They only allowed one journalist to come into their bubble, and it was me. So that was like an extremely big
Really?
honor to
Wow.
kind of be around. And you see Justin Bieber walking around and all these celebrities and
Wow.
influencers, and it's just like this is a trip. And especially since hadn't been around anyone like in that type of environment in a while, so that was one that'll stand out. But yeah, that's back in 2021, I think, at this point.
All right, last two speed rounds. Super Bowl prediction. I don't know if you're a big football guy, but do you have any prediction for who wins the Super Bowl?
Oh man, I'm not the biggest football guy, so I'll just go with the team that I guess I've heard is like the best, Philadelphia or maybe Buffalo. I'll go with that. I'll go with Buffalo since they're closest to Toronto. Let's roll with
Okay,
that.
I respect it. I'm in New York, so I think maybe Buffalo too. What about NBA Finals prediction? I don't know if you're going to say the Raptors for this one.
No, no, no. Man, we'll see if the Raptors even make it through their season with the team intact or if they blow it up. But for that, I'll go with Boston out of the East, and out of the West. Much tougher one for me. Let's take a flyer and say Denver is going to have a breakthrough
Really?
season. Let's get Jokic to have a deep playoff run here finally.
I could see it. All right, last three. I'm gonna let you go. This isn't speed round. Just, I mean, it could be speed round, but you can take your time if you want. What's
Sure.
one piece that comes to mind? One thing that you've produced that maybe stands out that you personally, maybe the follower. It doesn't matter about followers, likes, engagement, but you personally felt proud of that you accomplished.
Man, one that really stands out, I guess it's not this year, kind of goes back a bit further, but when we did the Fight Island card with Connor and Dustin, it was my first time out there. I did this, big piece for Rolling Stone, who I do some freelance stuff with as well. And it was kind of detailing like the intricacies of how they set up this bubble over there, what it was like to travel, the testing situation, all that. It was just kind of like a nice thing to document that I really enjoyed. That was fun. And then like from this year too, we've been doing these on the ground feature pieces as well. And shout out to MMA Junkie editor Abby Subban, who is literally the magic man. All the really great graphics and video editing that you see on MMA Junkie is mostly done by him. He is a phenomenal talent, and he does a great job kind of putting together these fight week blogs where we kind of recap it from beginning to end. And those are really fun to do. Have got to do Singapore, London, a few others of those, and I'm pretty proud of what we've done with all those. And hopefully that's like a franchise that can take off a little more for us next year and get some more exposure.
I remember watching the Singapore one. It was very entertaining. And then back
Mm-hmm.
to the article. I'm sure you did a bunch of interviews for that article, right? It sounds like that was an in-depth one.
Yeah, yeah. I talked to a lot of people, a lot of the fighters, what it was like dealing with the time change and the quarantine. And I remember Dustin Poirier talking about how insane he was going, having been in Fight Island for like 2 weeks, and we're right there by the F1 track the hotel was at, and like
Oh yeah.
they're trying to keep it on U.S. time, so the fighters are trying to sleep during the day, and he's like nonstop all day, and it's like kind of made you go a little bit insane, but. It was just fun seeing, how everyone dealt with that. And then to be in a bubble where, everyone's tested multiple times. There's no COVID there. You can, not wear a mask, and you can be like, felt a little bit like normal life that we hadn't had in about a year at that point. So that was something kind of special.
I remember someone saying something to me about those cars. I forgot about that. All right, last two. Advice for a young journalist like myself that is looking to get into this industry, this MMA reporting, journalism type stuff. Any
Yeah,
advice?
man. I think you just gotta try to look around the space and see what other people are doing and try to find a way to distinguish yourself a little bit from it. We have people all the time who are like, I'd love to work for MMA Junkie. I want to do this or that. And it's like, okay, like, what are you trying to bring to the table here? Anyone can, I think, like who has enough knowledge of the sport, a little bit of writing ability, can write up a recap of, X fighter versus X fighter. And those are essential parts of the job. That's content that we put out. But what's going to kind of differentiate you from things on like the rest of that? For me personally, it was like the statistics and the facts, and no one was really doing that at the time. The UFC didn't even have its partnership with like UFC stats and fight metric. And I kind of looked at the space and was like, hey, let's put a little things out there. And you go back to like my original website, it was just like 10 facts about UFC, 119 or something, and they're like terrible. Like some of the stuff that I put, it's like, okay, like I got past this using this as a fact, but it was a building point, and then try to get more creative based off that. So I'd say, yeah, just look around and maybe see what other people are doing, and either how you can make yours different or do it better than them. And I think that that's a way that makes yourself stand out. I think look at people like Nolan King and Farah Hanoun on our site, who were people at a time who DM me asking about like, what they could do to break into the space. And then, look at they are a few years later, they're my colleagues and absolutely killing it. So I know that the amount of like high level positions here at MMA Junkie, MMA Fighting, ESPN, things like that, they are limited. And at times there's not a ton of turnover with staff, but I think you look at people who are employed in these sites currently, it's absolutely attainable.
I love what Nolan does. The one thing I love most about what Nolan does is the what is it, five fighters on the
Yeah,
doorstep.
on the
Love
doorstep
that series. That's like something I look forward to every month. So I feel like
for
that's what
sure.
you're talking about making. That's pretty different.
Exactly. Like who's spending their time? There's so much high level fighting, so many UFCs, Bellators. Like you're not going to find many of the upper tier journalists, I guess if you could call it that, the people at the highest sites who are spending their time writing about prospects, watching these lower level fights, just because it's so difficult. There's not a ton of time to
Yeah.
do that. But the fact that Nolan does stuff like that, it's the perfect example of what we're talking about here.
And then I wanted to ask you, finish every interview with this question. I'm curious to hear what you have to say. When it's all said and done, reporting NBA, UFC, this, that, a third, whatever it may be, what do you want people to remember most about Mike Bohn above all else?
Oh man, I guess just hopefully that I was fair to the sport and the way that I cover it, and obviously at least brought some joy to whether it's like you reading some of the written content I put out, enjoy the video interviews I watch, just that you think it's worth your time to consume the content that I put out there. These questions always make me feel kind of weird because like this isn't about me, right? Like I hate to be part of the storyline. I'm sure you saw like the stuff with Mike Jackson and Jake Shields this past week, and Jake Shields is tweeting stuff about me, and I'm like, hey bro, like I'll talk to you, but this isn't about me. This isn't about my opinion on these certain things. This is about you guys, and I'm happy to give you guys the platform and give you an opportunity to share your message. But I'm not trying to be part of the story ever here. And I know there's certain people in media who feel differently about things like that or try to insert themselves in the narrative. That's not what I'm looking to do. So as long as you come away with my content and feel it's whether it's educational or entertaining or whatever it's meant to be, in that certain piece, that's something that I just hopefully will be remembered by, and obviously being a hard worker and fair and all that kind of stuff.
That was a great answer. Thank you so much for the advice. I really appreciate it. And thank you for taking the time today. One of the greatest journalistic influences on the sport, without a doubt, man. Pleasure to work alongside you at like I think two or three events right by now, and look forward to seeing you in the future. We made good time. We got a minute left, so thank you,
Oh
man.
yeah, perfect, man. I appreciate you. It was great chatting, and yeah, I'll see you at many events in the future. You're well on your way, man. You're doing a good job.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. It means a lot coming from you. Be good, man.
Take care.
Go
Bye.
Raptors.
Thank you.